Introduction. A city haunted by its own reflection, it begins with a hush. London always does. The river slows its breath beneath a blanket of fog. The lamplighters move through the streets like monks with their small, flickering blessings, and somewhere far off, a church bell tolls for no one in particular. It is the late 19th century, and the empire sits astride the world. But if you peel back the brocade and brass of its confidence, you'll find a city utterly obsessed with death. Everywhere, mourning drapes itself across the skyline like soot. Curtains are drawn long past dawn. Doorways are marked with black crepe. Even the air tastes faintly of coal smoke and cologne, the perfume of a society that has made grief not merely a response, but a way of life. Londoners speak of the dead as if they are simply in another room, late to supper. They sleep with locks of hair beneath their pillows. They walk arm in arm with ghosts. The obsession begins at the top, of course. Queen Victoria herself, the widow sovereign, still whispering to a husband who has been gone for decades, teaches the nation how to mourn properly. In her image, sorrow becomes both spectacle and sacrament. A widow's wardrobe is as codified as a uniform. Mourning cards bear black borders like tiny tombstones. Portrait photographers make their livings posing the dead in chairs, eyes painted open to mimic the living. Even hair, that last stubborn relic of the body, is twisted into brooch and watch chains, a talisman against forgetting. And yet, this is not a city sunk by despair. It is a city that has learned how to invite its dead back inside. Séances are the entertainment of choice for the fashionable set, and table-wrapping mediums rise to the status of celebrities. The parlors of Bloomsbury echo with whispers from beyond the veil, or perhaps with the artful performances of clever frauds. London doesn't care which. What matters is the possibility that the door might open. The fascination extends beyond drawing rooms. On fog-heavy nights, hansom cabs clatter past old abbeys said to be haunted by monks who refuse to stay buried. Pub regulars tell of spectral figures glimpsed in the corner of a mirror, gone when they turn their heads. And though the word Halloween is rarely spoken in Victorian London, the Eve of All Hallows has never truly vanished. Bonfires still smolder in the countryside, apples are peeled to divine future lovers, and city dwellers lower their voices as the last days of October draw near. The air itself seems thinner, as though the dead might indeed walk the cobbles once more. This is a city standing at the height of its power and trembling before the oldest mystery it knows. A city of steel and empire that still leaves a chair empty for the departed. A city that builds railways to the graveyard and calls them necropolis lines. A city haunted not by what it has lost, but by what it refuses to release. Here, beneath the glow of gaslight, death is not an ending. It is a presence, lingering, intimate, and endlessly invited. And as the long nights close in and the calendar edges toward the turning of the year, London holds its breath. Because on certain nights, in certain rooms, the dead do not stay buried. They wait, patient and polite, just beyond the thin curtain of the living, and every heartbeat in the city is an invitation for them to come inside. Chapter I, Queen Victoria's Ghost. Listen closely, because London loves a secret. The city never learned to bury anything properly, least of all its dead. Not sorrow, not scandal, not the soft throb of grief that pulses beneath the pavement like a second bloodstream. It is the late century, gaslight thinning the fog into gauze, the river breathing with its old tidal lungs, and the empire sits on a throne of black crepe. Our sovereign wears mourning like a sacrament, and the nation follows her into the dark. They will tell you it was love that dressed the queen in black after her prince slipped into the cool room, where voices don't carry. But love alone cannot command a continent to change its wardrobe. No, what Victoria did was something stranger, something sorcerous. She taught millions how to make a home for the dead. She taught them to curate absence. The courts and drawing rooms began to practice grief as if it were a refined art. and the city, never one to miss a trend, lacquered its windows with shadow. You can walk these streets and read the mourning rules the way you wrote a headline. The widow in full first-year black, swaddled in dull bombazine that devours the light. The half-mourning lavender, a modest thaw upon the heart's tundra. The crepe veil, heavy as wet paper, making breath sound intimate and every footfall sound final. Even children are bound by etiquette, tiny figures in sober suits and dark dresses, the nursery instructed in the grammar of sorrow before Latin declensions. The books say exactly how long your love should weigh upon you. The city takes note if your grief ends early. It also takes note if it never ends. Both are a perversion. Both suggest the dead are not being handled correctly. Behind doors, grief becomes industry. Dressmakers earn their keep stitching darkness. Milliners conjure solemn hats to frame red eyes. Photographers wait in quiet parlors with tripods and patience because some families are not ready to let the last likeness pass. They pose their dead with a jumpless violence, propping sisters beside brothers, wives beside husbands, propping babies whose names were learned only long enough to be spoken at a funeral. The plates drink the light, the eyes do not blink. In some rooms, the bodies are strapped upright so that the memory will not appear to lean toward departure. In the prints, a hand will look a touch too stiff, a shoulder too square, and when you notice it, a breath will catch in your throat. You will put the picture away, you will lock the drawer, you will come back to it again and again, because this is how the Victorians practice their magic. They refuse to let the doors stay closed. And then there is the hair. It sounds monstrous until you feel the lock in your palm, soft as a promise. Hair survives. Hair remembers. The city's jewelers weave bracelets, brooch, watch chains out of threads the grave could not digest. Lovers win wrist to wrist by the most intimate rope. Mothers pin their children to their breasts with the children's own hair spun into filigree. There is nothing ghoulish in it when you are the one who cannot sleep. Every strand is a sentence the dead are still speaking. We talk about mourning jewelry as if it were grim, but it is closer to prayer, and prayer is always a kind of hunger. Yes, Victoria grieved a husband, but she also endorsed a ritual that made sorrow a national emblem. The court set the temperature for everything from fashion to table etiquette, and mourning etiquette rippled outward like a black tide. Invitations in black borders, calling cards with corners turned down, funeral biscuits printed with skulls, sweet as lullabies. A city that will not let you forget that everyone you love is practicing to disappear. But London had always suspected this. It is a city built upon its dead. The plague pits under the parks do not forget their names. The Roman bones beneath the Bank of England still count their Caesars. If you lay your ear to the grass of Bunhill Fields, you can hear dissenters breathe in their sleep. The ground is crowded. We pave over the old houses and then dream of footsteps in the upstairs rooms. We lay new floors and the floorboards creak with a rhythm no carpenter planned. The fog is not merely weather here, it is a veil. And we have been taught what to do with veils. The Queen withdraws, that is the other spell. She lets the nation know that grief is a privacy the powerful are entitled to take, and so the middle classes imitate a palace they have never entered. Curtains drawn, post-mist. A year passes in a house that has the sound of absence woven into its walls. The servants go quieter. The clock in the hallway sounds louder. The family tells itself they are honoring memory, and they are, but what they are also doing is summoning. A still room is a chamber where echoes grow brave. You light fewer lamps and see more shapes. You speak more softly and hear replies. Widowed London learns the erotic grammar of mourning. There is nothing more beautiful than a face behind a veil. Desire arrives by way of prohibition. Men fall in love with silhouettes walking alone at dusk, with hands folded inside black gloves. Letters bloom with careful tenderness because any forwardness would be sacrilege. In the pews, when the hymn drifts upward like a tether, A widow's profile can drive a man to promise himself to goodness, not for sanctity's sake, but for proximity to that impeccable ruin. Grief paints a mouth you may not kiss. Nothing is so intoxicating as a boundary. The shopkeepers know it. They sell colognes called night blooming. They sell pens that promise not to snag black crepe. They sell mirrors with sable ribbons tied across their corners. The city learns to fall in love with women who belong to the dead. And yet, out beyond the attics of Mayfair and the careful terraces of Kensington, the river keeps bringing in the coal and the apples and the bodies. Death is not an aesthetic in Bermondsey. It is a wage. The cholera comes in waves as if the Thames has moods. There are funerals that cost the week's pay, and funerals that cost nothing because a landlord is done pretending to be merciful. Still, even in the poorer parishes, a ribbon, a pin, a photograph in a cheap frame. Nobody's immune to the idea that the dead are not gone so long as you behave correctly. A woman in Limehouse refuses to move the chair where her child last sat. A man in Camden buys a second-hand locket and promises the picture inside he will drink less. The city trains itself to be haunted. It becomes a skill. The Queen cannot be held responsible for all of this, of course. Superstition did not need a crown to flourish. But when Victoria retires into her fortress of mourning, London receives a permission slip it has long wanted. You may fear the dark. You may set a place at the table for an empty chair. You may keep the room exactly as it was. You may talk to an absent man, and if no one is listening, talk for him too. The newspapers smirk at some of it in their social columns and count mourning months like wagers, but even the men who roll their eyes draw their blinds earlier in winter. If you want to understand the city's heart in these years, you must understand the ritual of the visit. The card tray by the door collects little rectangles of paper like a pack of tiny tombstones. The black border says, "I am still inside the ash. Do not bring your brightness to me. I would not survive it." The corners folded back say, "I waited. You missed me. Pity us both." The tray is a map of who is allowed into the quiet and who must wait at the edge. Sorrow stratifies society more cleanly than money does. There are doors grief can open that gold cannot. And somehow, as always happens, commerce climbs onto the casket and plays a tune. Undertakers begin to post placards that read as softly as sermons. Black horses available, plumes, mutes to walk before the coffin, a fine hearse with lamps that will not gutter in a drizzle. Mourning coaches with curtains you can draw to weep unseen while still being seen to be weeping. The city loves a parade, even if it is a parade of endings. There are neighborhoods where the passing bell rings, so often it becomes a neighbor you wave to without thinking. The bell has a way of getting into your chest and ringing there long after the air is quiet again. At Osborne House and Windsor, messages arrive. Some are petitions. Some are the ordinary business of rule. Some are the letters of mediums who claim his voice has found their table. The Queen answers what she must and ignores what she cannot bear. The rest of the nation experiments on her behalf. Drawing rooms darken, circles are cast. Hands are clasped around polished wood. The room agrees to hold its breath. A rap at the wainscot, another. A table rises upon a single leg as gracefully as any ballet. Someone sobs. Someone laughs in a way that sounds like a train starting. Fraud? Faith? The city decides it prefers the question to the answer. The more you ask, the more the veil moves. Little changes take on the weight of commandment. Clocks are draped when a body is in the house, so that time will not catch the soul on its way out. Mirrors are covered so that nothing curious will look back. Salt is scattered at thresholds because salt remembers the ocean and the ocean knows how to keep secrets. Candles are burned all night in rooms where no one sleeps. It is superstition, yes, but it is also choreography. Grief needs something for the hands to do. There are children who learn to spell their names by tracing the letters on a funeral card. There are boys who learn the first anatomy they will ever learn by looking at the portrait of an uncle who did not survive the winter, noticing the way the collar sits strangely at the neck, the way the lips look too resolved. There are girls who learn that beauty and sorrow make a devastating duet and keep that lesson hidden under their tongues until the day they meet it. The city is a school that gives out different diplomas to different streets, but everybody attends the class where the teacher writes memento mori on the board and then stares until the room goes still. If you step back far enough from the lace and the tears and the veils, you can see something almost alchemical at work. The nation is transmuting terror into ritual. Death is a chaos that embarrasses us, and so we give it choreography, costume, and etiquette column. You bow. You do not speak first. You write your notes in a black-bordered hand. You keep your hands folded in public. You allow private days in which you do not rise from the bed. This is not hypocrisy. This is survival. When a storm is louder than the house, you sing. When absence is louder than the heart, you arrange absence into a room you can keep clean. London learns to love this hush. It suits the fog. It suits the taste for melancholy the city has always had in secret. And while the queen remains resolute in her mourning, she is less a woman than a weather system. There are years where the entire nation seems to exist inside a cloud bank, language muffled, emotions softened to shapes too large to hold. Men who would not otherwise cry permit themselves tears because a sovereign has cried for them. Women take long afternoon walks in black and discover that sorrow, worn properly, grants a kind of sovereignty of its own. Children peer through curtains at processions thick with feathers and glass and think, someday a river of black will part for me. There is comfort in the promise that the living will not drop you as if you never happened. And beneath it all, there is the old city, effortlessly blending pageant and haunt. The mist rises from the river like a congregation and drifts through neighborhoods, as if inspecting their devotions. Lamplighters go about their work like attendants at an altar. The omnibuses rattle like bone boxes. In the arcades, the shop windows glow as if relics were on display. Somewhere a clock strikes the wrong hour and a woman in mourning looks up, because once you have lost something, the world speaks to you in miscounts and slips. Do not mistake me. There is cruelty stitched into this cloth. Women can drown inside the etiquette that is supposed to keep them afloat. A widow too young can become a scandal simply by continuing to be alive in public. A man tired of his sorrow can be judged for wanting ordinary laughter. Ritual becomes judgment faster than lightning turns to thunder. But even with its cruelties, the system holds. It holds because it gives the city a language to speak to its dead and hear something like an answer. So you see how the stage is set. The city has learned to hold its breath. The queen has shown how to make an empire out of absence. The shops have taught the fingers what to do. The parlors have taught the night how to listen. Once you have trained yourself to be haunted, you do not need a witch to knock at the window. A draft will do. A certain fold in the curtain will do. A memory that arrives with the smell of damp wool will do. And on the nights when the calendar leans toward holy things, when the old harvest ghosts from other centuries bend close to watch a modern city play at reverence, it takes very little to push the room from solemn to strange. A chair creaks, a photograph tilts of its own weight. A lock of hair in a brooch refuses to lie flat. The veil breathes. The bell rings in your chest again. This is how London entered its season of managed haunting. Not with shrieks, but with stitches. Not with bonfires, but with curtains drawn against the dusk. Not with witches on broomsticks, but with a queen in permanent evening. The dead did not need to walk through walls. The living built doorways where walls used to be. And if, in the quiet after midnight, a footstep on the landing sounded like a returning tread, well, who would be so graceless as to call it a draft? Better to rise, to light a lamp, to speak a name softly into a room trained to answer. We will go there, you and I, to the rooms where the lamps burn low and the city waits for the veil to lift an inch. But first, remember the black dress and the woman inside it. Remember the way a crown can darken into a halo. Remember that etiquette is a kind of spell. And remember that once a nation learns to love the sound of its own mourning, the dead will never again be asked to keep quiet. Chapter 2. When spirits knocked on parlor walls, it began, as most revolutions do, with a sound too small to take seriously. A single rap on a wall at a farmhouse in upstate New York, 1848, then another, and another. The Fox sisters, two teenage girls with a flair for the dramatic, claimed the knocks were the voice of a murdered peddler, desperate to speak. It was crude, almost laughable, and yet the world leaned closer. Those raps would ripple outward across oceans, and within a decade, London's drawing rooms would be pulsing with the same ghostly code. Victorian London, so proud of its science and empire, fell head over heels for the idea that the dead might be summoned like dinner guests. It wasn't enough to mourn anymore. Now they wanted conversation, and the city obliged. They called it spiritualism, that word makes it sound genteel. It was far stranger than that. Parlors once reserved for polite tea now hosted darkened séances. Curtains were drawn, lamps extinguished, and the faithful gathered in circles, fingertips just touching, hearts hammering as they waited for the veil to thin. The rituals were precise. Candles were trimmed low. Windows sealed. A prayer murmured, half Christian, half pagan. Then the silence, a silence so deep you could hear the furniture breathe. And then, sometimes the furniture did. Tables rocked of their own accord. Bells rang without visible hands. Flowers wilted and revived. Some swore they felt cold fingers brush their cheeks. A few claimed full apparitions stepped into the room, pale and dripping with eternity. And the raps, always the raps, spelling out messages from the beyond. The dead, it seemed, were not content to rest. No one embodied this strange new faith better than Daniel Douglas Home, the most famous medium of the age, and perhaps its greatest enigma. Home didn't hide in shadow or demand darkness. He conducted séances in full gaslight, daring skeptics to catch him cheating. They never did. He levitated in drawing rooms, not theatrically but softly, drifting upward like a man in a dream. Witnesses swore they saw him float out one window and back in another 3 stories above the ground. Napoleon III invited him to the Tuileries. Emperors and bishops sought his counsel. Even Queen Victoria's court, so steeped in solemnity, could not resist peering through that spectral keyhole. Skeptics called him a fraud. Scientists came armed with measuring tapes and skepticism, only to leave muttering about things they could not explain. Perhaps he was a master illusionist. Perhaps the dead found him particularly hospitable. Either way, he became the very image of the age's obsession, a bridge between reason and rapture, science and sonance. And then there was Florence Cook, the teenage girl from East London whose séances became a scandal of the 1870s. Florence claimed to channel a spirit named Katie King, a beautiful woman draped in white who materialized from the darkness and conversed with guests. People gasped, wept, even knelt. Katie allowed herself to be touched, examined, though never too thoroughly. And when skeptics lunged to seize her, she vanished into thin air, leaving only Florence trembling in her chair. The great physicist William Crookes was among those who believed. He hosted Florence, studied her, and insisted that Katie King was no trick. Crookes' scientific reputation was nearly shredded for it, but he would not back down. Katie had walked among them, he swore. He had measured her pulse, heard her breath. He, who knew the laws of nature better than most men alive, declared that something beyond those laws had brushed against him in a London parlor. The scandal was irresistible. Was Katie merely Florence in a bedsheet? Was Crookes blinded by grief, or perhaps by infatuation? Gossip bloomed like mold. But the séances continued, and London kept showing up, desperate for a glimpse of that pale woman who might be a spirit. Or might be a schoolgirl in costume. It hardly mattered. The line between illusion and eternity had become deliciously, dangerously thin. Others followed. Eusebia Palladino from Italy, whose séances featured flying furniture and ghostly hands. Annie Eva Faye, who escaped from ropes and produced spirit hands that vanished as quickly as they appeared. Fraud was exposed often. The Fox sisters themselves admitted in old age that their spirit raps were produced by cracking toe joints, and yet belief did not falter. Exposure did nothing but deepen the fascination. If one medium was false, perhaps the next would be real. The Victorians, ever confident in progress, simply moved on to the next promising conduit to the beyond. Even the intellectuals succumbed. Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, creator of Sherlock Holmes and champion of reason, became one of spiritualism's most devoted apostles. He attended séances, defended mediums, and published passionate treatises arguing that life after death was not superstition but scientific fact. The dead, he wrote, are very much alive, and they long to speak. Critics scoffed, but Doyle did not flinch. His certainty was born not of gullibility, but of longing. Like so many Victorians, he was haunted not just by ghosts, but by grief. Spiritualism offered not merely spectacle, but solace, the chance to believe that love did not end at the grave. Séances were not confined to the salons of the wealthy. They thrived in cramped tenements and backroom parlors, where working-class Londoners summoned the spirits of lost children, drowned husbands, mothers taken too soon. These gatherings were raw, fervent, and deeply human. The elite might have sought philosophical proof of the soul. The poor sought comfort, and if a flickering candle in the rickety table could offer even a whisper of the ones they missed, who could begrudge them that? Yet beneath the table wrapping and ectoplasm, something older stirred. The Victorians liked to imagine themselves a rational people, heirs to Darwin and industry, but they were also children of a land steeped in ghost lore and pagan memory. They built railways to cemeteries, literal necropolis trains that carried mourners and their dead from Waterloo Station to the great burial grounds outside the city. They picnicked among gravestones. They wore the dead around their necks and spoke their names into the dark. They believed in progress, yes, but they also believed that the world of the living and the world of the dead were separated by nothing more than a thin, trembling curtain. It is easy, from our century, to smirk at all this, to see charlatans fleecing the gullible and grieving Victorians clutching at shadows, but that misses the truth. The séances were not just entertainment, they were a mirror. They reflected the ache that throbbed beneath London's iron heart, the hunger to know that love, once lit, does not simply wink out, that the cold ground is not the end of the story, that perhaps, in a room gone still and a silence gone deep, we might still hear the ones we've lost tapping gently from the other side. The Victorians built steam engines and telegraphs, but what they longed for most was a message from beyond the grave. And so they gathered, again and again, in rooms heavy with perfume and anticipation, waiting for that soft rap on the wall, the sound that meant someone was still listening. Chapter 3, The Devil's Hour. Halloween by another name. The city does not call it Halloween. That word still smells too strongly of bonfires and barbarism, of druids and oak groves and offerings left for unseen gods. Yet every autumn, as the light thins and the fog turns sour, London grows restless. Its heartbeat slows, its windows close a little earlier, and on a certain night, the night when the harvest ends, and the dark half of the year begins, even the most rational of Victorians finds their thoughts drifting toward the dead. They call it All Hallows' Eve, and officially, it is a Christian vigil. Bells toll in churches, prayers are said for departed souls, and families leave candles burning on their hearths to guide spirits on their way to heaven. But beneath the hymns and incense, something older stirs, something that remembers a time before Christianity, when the Celts marked this turning with Samhain, a festival of endings and beginnings, when the veil between worlds was at its thinnest. That older memory has never quite died, and even in the Iron Age of industry, it still seeps through the cracks. Out in the countryside, far from the choking soot of London, villages still light bonfires on the last night of October. They say it is to honor the saints, but the fire knows better. It is the same flame that once burned to chase away the spirits of the wandering dead, the same glow that once marked the gates between this world and the next. Children leap through the embers for luck. Farmers circle their fields with torches to bless the soil. Old women mutter charms as they scatter ashes on their thresholds. It is ritual disguised as celebration, a ghost of paganism wearing a Christian mask. In Cornwall, they still speak of the Allantide apples, bright red and polished to a mirror sheen, given as charms for good fortune. In Wales, children carve grotesque faces into hollowed-out turnips, punkies, they call them, and carry them from door to door. And in the Highlands of Scotland, girls peel apples in a single curling strip and toss them over their shoulders, believing the fallen peel will spell the initials of their future husband. These are not Halloween games as we know them, but they are the bones from which our modern rituals are built. London, ever the cynic and ever the thief, takes these rural customs and repurposes them. In drawing rooms from Bloomsbury to Belgravia, young women giggle as they toss nutshells into the fire to divine the fates of their romances. If the shells burn brightly together, so will the couple. If they sputter and leap apart, so too will love. In servants' quarters and tenement kitchens, charms are whispered over bowls of water, and candle flames are studied for signs of a departed soul's presence. Most Londoners would scoff at the idea of witchcraft, but on this night, superstition is not only permitted, it is expected. Even the city itself seems to collude with the old beliefs. The fog thickens, curling low to the ground like a living thing. The gas lamps burn weak and yellow, their light swallowed by the mist. The Thames exhales a cold breath that rattles the windows of houses along its banks. And the bells, always the bells, toll in ways that make people stop and listen, counting the strokes as though they might mean something. In a city that prides itself on order and progress, this night feels oddly ungovernable, as if the laws that keep the world stitched together have been loosened by unseen fingers. It is not just a night for charms and whispers. It is a night for stories, and London has plenty. On All Hallows Eve, the city's haunted history crawls a little closer to the surface. The taverns fill with tales of the Black Dog of Newgate, a spectral hound sent to stalk the prison's halls, devouring the souls of the wicked. In the East End, people lower their voices when speaking of the phantom coach that races down Cock Lane, its spectral horses leaving no prints on the cobblestones. And in Clockenwell, they swear that on the last night of October, a headless monk glides silently through the ruins of a long-forgotten priory, his lantern swinging like a pendulum. Not all the tales are ancient. The Victorians, for all their factories and railways, still create new ghosts as quickly as they bury their dead. The cholera epidemics have left their marks, as have the workhouses and asylums, the forgotten dead of a city that grows faster than it can bury its own. There are rumors of spectral figures seen near the Necropolis Railway, that grim line carrying coffins and mourners from Waterloo Station to Brookwood Cemetery. Some say the train itself is haunted, that pale faces have been glimpsed at the windows on nights when no funeral was scheduled. In more genteel circles, the fascination with this night takes a subtler form. Dinner parties end early. Curtains are drawn tight. The city holds its breath. Some families leave a place set at the table for those who have gone, a quiet nod to the belief that the dead might visit for just one night. A candle is lit and left by the window, not because anyone truly expects a ghost to come calling, but because it feels wrong not to. And then there are the churchyards. If you walk past one just before midnight, you might see a figure kneeling among stones, lips moving in prayer. It is said that if you keep vigil from dusk till dawn on All Hallows Eve, you will see the spirits of those destined to die in the coming year pass through the gate. Most dismiss it as nonsense, but a few still keep the watch. Some traditions die hard, and some will not die at all. The night is not without its darker fears. Old beliefs cling stubbornly to life, and many still believe that evil is strongest on this night. The devil's hour, they call it, that midnight moment when the veil is thinnest and the dead walk most freely. Mothers tie rowan twigs above their doorways to keep witches at bay. Fathers mark their thresholds with chalk crosses. In poorer districts where superstition runs hotter, families scatter salt in a circle around their beds or hang horseshoes above their windows. They laugh about it in daylight. They do it without fail when the sun goes down. Even the police notice an uptick in strangeness. Mischief is expected on All Hallows Eve, gates unhinged, cab horses painted with chalk, door knockers smeared with soot, but every so often something darker occurs. A body found in an alley with no clear cause. A child vanishing between one doorstep and the next. A woman claiming to have seen her dead husband standing at the foot of her bed. Most of these incidents are explained away. Some are not. Either way, they become part of the season's whispered lore. The newspapers, always hungry for sensation, join in the dance. Articles about ancient Halloween superstitions appear alongside stern editorials warning against drunken revelry and pagan nonsense. Some papers print lurid stories of ghostly visitations or witches' sabbaths in the woods beyond Hampstead. Others scoff, mocking the foolishness of those who cling to such superstitions, but even the skeptics cannot resist publishing them. Fear sells, and on this night, everyone wants to be just a little afraid. In the parlors where séances are held, the night carries particular weight. Spiritualists believe that All Hallows Eve is the easiest night to reach the other side, and séances are often scheduled to coincide with it. The raps come quicker, the tables rise higher, the manifestations, so the faithful insist, are stronger. Perhaps it is mere suggestion. Perhaps it is something else. Either way, the belief is powerful enough to make even hardened skeptics shiver when the clock strikes 12. Some historians will later argue that the Victorians did not truly celebrate Halloween, and they are right in the narrowest sense. There were no costumes paraded through the streets, no plastic pumpkins on stoops, no mass-produced candy. But to say they ignored the night is to misunderstand them entirely. They observed it in quieter, stranger ways, in the hush that fell over the city, in the charms whispered over dying embers, and the candles left burning on windowsills. They honored the night not with noise, but with reverence. They understood in their bones that this was a hinge in the year, a moment when the world tilted toward darkness and the dead leaned close to listen. Even the empire's relentless machinery seemed to pause for breath. Trains ran on schedule, factories belched smoke, Parliament debated tariffs and treaties, but beneath it all was the awareness that this night was not like the others. The Victorians may have built iron bridges and steamships, but they still lived in a world that could turn strange and holy with the setting of the sun. And if you happened to walk the streets of London in those hours before midnight, you would feel it too. The city that usually thrummed with noise would seem muffled, as though holding its breath. The fog would swallow the light, leaving you adrift in a world that felt older than it should. You might hear footsteps behind you and find no one there. You might glance into an alley and see a shape that dissolves when you look twice. And when the bells began to toll, you might feel something shift, not in the air, but in the thin membrane that separates the living from the dead. The Victorians did not need to call it Halloween. They understood that names are just garments we dress our fears in. What mattered was the night itself, a night when fire and frost touched hands, when love and loss shared a table, when the world grew porous and the past came walking. They called it All Hallows Eve. They called it Samhain. They called it nothing at all. But they knew, as we still know, that this night is not like the others. It is the devil's hour, the hinge of the year, the pause between breath and silence. And in London, that great city of progress and ghosts, the dead do not wait for an invitation. They are already here, walking beside you through the fog. Chapter 4. The Ghosts of Fleet Street and Whitechapel. London has never been a city that sleeps soundly. It dozes, yes, slumped against the river, breathing through its chimneys, but always with one eye open. Too many things have died here. Too many names have been spoken once and never again. The living tread upon a thin crust of cobblestone beneath which centuries of the dead are stacked like forgotten pages in a book. It is no wonder, then, that this city seethes with ghosts. Walk with me now, down streets slick with fog and lamplight, and I will show you where they linger. I, the ghost map beneath our feet. The Romans buried their dead outside the city walls, as was their custom, and so London grew atop a ring of graves. Plague pits pockmarked the ground beneath Soho and Smithfield, their locations half remembered, half denied. Construction workers, even in the Queen's time, sometimes break through into ossuaries of nameless bones, a femur here, a skull there, 1,000 fragments of Black Death, sealed under the foundations of progress. The Victorians know this. They read about it in the penny papers and hear stories from navvies digging tunnels for the new underground. You cannot dig in London, one writer quips, without striking the knuckle of a ghost. And though they claim to laugh, they keep a wary eye on cellar doors and damp basements, as though something might crawl back up from the strata. This is the soil in which Victorian ghost stories thrive, a city built not just upon its dead, but with them. Every new churchyard overflows, graves are reused, bones shift and mingle. There are entire parishes whose gardens bloom because of the rich mulch of centuries-old flesh beneath. A city like that cannot help but be haunted. 2. Fleet Street, where words and wraiths collide. Let us begin where the ink runs thickest. Fleet Street, home to the press, where scandal and truth share a pint and a printing press. The street is loud by day, with newsboys shouting headlines and editors barking orders. But by night, the presses fall silent and the ghosts take their shift. They say the specter of Father Rudolph, a Benedictine monk, drifts along the side of St. Bride's Church, muttering prayers for the souls of plague victims buried beneath. Those who have seen him swear he is as solid as any man, until they look twice and he's gone, swallowed by the dark. Inside the churchyard, mourners claim to hear chanting on still nights, in Latin older than the stones. Down the street stands the Old Cock Tavern, where journalists once toasted deadlines and politicians plotted futures. In its cellar, staff whisper of a pale figure who appears by the barrels, a man in 17th century garb, with hollow eyes and lips blue as frost. Some say he was a printer crushed beneath a collapsed press during the Great Fire. Others insist he was a debtor who hanged himself in the cellar. All agree that when he appears, the candles gutter and the air smells of scorched paper. Even the grand offices of the times are not immune. Cleaners tell of footsteps echoing through empty rooms and doors that slam of their own accord. More than one typesetter has claimed to feel a cold hand rest upon their shoulder as they work alone at night. The dead, one quipped darkly, have strong opinions about punctuation. 3. Temple and the Phantom Coach. If you wander east toward the temple, where barristers and judges shuffle through their daily theater, you may hear it before you see it. The clatter of hooves on cobblestone, the squeal of wheels on whetstone. Yet when you turn the corner, there is nothing. The Phantom Coach of Middle Temple Lane is one of London's oldest spectral stories, said to appear on nights when the fog lies heavy and the moon is thin. Witnesses swear they've seen its lantern swing and its horses foam, but it vanishes the instant anyone approaches. Theories abound. Some say it carries the ghost of Judge Jeffreys, the hanging judge, doomed to ride forever in penance for the blood he spilled. Others claim it is the coach that bore a condemned man to Tyburn, doomed to replay its final journey again and again. The Victorians adore such stories and print them too, as if believing them might somehow domesticate their terror. The Illustrated London News once ran a sober piece describing a barrister who fled his chambers after hearing the coach stop outside his window 3 nights in a row. When he dared look out on the 4th night, he saw not a carriage but a coffin waiting in the street below. 4. Whitechapel, the city's bleeding heart. If Fleet Street is haunted by words, Whitechapel is haunted by screams. Even before Jack the Ripper carved his name into its walls, the East End was a place soaked in sorrow. Poverty was its daily plague, disease festered in the damp, the workhouses were overflowing. Death walked these streets openly, not as a specter, but as a neighbor. And so it is here, among the alleys and gin-soaked tenements, that the ghosts feel closest. On Durward Street, formerly Bucks Row, they speak of a woman in a blood-stained dress wandering aimlessly at night, clutching her throat. Some say she is Mary Ann Nichols, the Ripper's first canonical victim. Policemen on night watch have sworn they heard footsteps behind them and turned to find no one there. Dogs growl at shadows that slide along brick walls. Lamps flicker and die for no reason. Whitechapel remembers its dead. In nearby Hanbury Street, neighbors report a woman sobbing, echoing through the night, only to fall silent when anyone approaches. That is where Annie Chapman was found in September 1888, her body mutilated beyond comprehension. One witness, decades later, swore she saw a pale figure step from the doorway and vanish into the fog. It was not evil I felt, she said, only sorrow so deep it could not die. But the East End's hauntings are not limited to Ripper victims. The Ten Bells Pub, a favorite haunt of prostitutes and laborers, is said to host several spirits. Patrons have reported spectral women in Victorian garb drifting through the bar, and one lord fled the premises after waking to find a transparent figure standing at the foot of his bed. It is tempting to believe these ghosts are the murdered women themselves, unwilling to leave the only corner of the world that ever knew their names. Whitechapel's ghosts are not polite. They do not whisper Latin prayers or drift silently through abbey walls. They bleed, they wail, they accuse. They are the embodiment of a city's guilt, crying out for justice it never received. V. The Theatre of Ghosts. Not all of London's spectres are confined to its darker corners. Even its stages are haunted. At the theatre, Royal Drury Lane, actors speak of the man in grey, a figure in an 18th century coat and powdered wig who appears in the upper circle during rehearsals. He never speaks, never moves, merely watches. Legend says he is the spirit of a man found bricked into a wall during renovations, stabbed through the heart. Oddly, his appearance is considered a good omen. Productions that catch a glimpse of him often enjoy long, successful runs. Further west, the Adelphi Theatre is haunted by William Terrace, a beloved actor stabbed to death by a jealous colleague in 1897. Terrace still appears backstage, they say often near the dressing room he once used. On some nights, the scent of his favorite cigar drifts through the air even though no one is smoking. Performers who feel a reassuring hand on their shoulder before curtain time know who to thank. Ghost stories cling to these theaters like dust to velvet. Perhaps it is because the stage has always trafficked in illusion, a place where the living pretend to be dead and the dead are resurrected, night after night. Perhaps ghosts feel at home there, amid the applause. They, hauntings of stone and steel. Ghosts are not limited to alleys and attics. They haunt London's monuments, too. The Tower of London, already heavy with blood, boasts an entire parliament of phantoms. The princes in the tower, murdered on their uncle's orders, are said to appear as spectral children playing in the corridors. Anne Boleyn walks without her head near the site of her execution, carrying it under her arm. Guards report sudden drops in temperature and inexplicable feelings of dread. More than one sentry has resigned after a night of inexplicable terror on watch. At Westminster Abbey, visitors have reported seeing a hooded monk kneeling in silent prayer, only to vanish when approached. Some say he is a Benedictine from the Abbey's earliest days. Others claim he is a priest murdered during the Reformation. Either way, he seems in no hurry to leave. Even the new marvels of the age are not immune. Workers building the London Underground whisper of strange figures glimpsed in the tunnels, shadows that dart just out of reach of lamplight. One foreman swore that a disembodied voice shouted, "Move," moments before a tunnel collapse, saving his life. Skeptics scoff, but the men who work below ground are less dismissive. The dead built this city, one says. Why wouldn't they ride the trains too? 7. The science of haunting. The Victorians, for all their fascination with ghosts, are not fools. They debate, investigate, and attempt to measure the supernatural with the same fervor they apply to steam engines and telegraphs. In 1882, the Society for Psychical Research is founded, dedicated to the scientific study of hauntings, apparitions, and spiritual phenomena. Its members include scholars, theologians, and scientists, among them the brilliant William Barrett and philosopher Henry Sidgwick. They catalog ghost sightings, interview witnesses, and conduct controlled séances. Some conclude that hauntings are mere hallucinations, tricks of the senses born of grief or suggestion. Others are not so sure. They note the consistency of reports, the strange phenomena that defy easy explanation, the emotional weight these apparitions carry. Ghosts, they argue, might be fragments of consciousness, echoes trapped in the walls of old houses. The debate spills into the public sphere. Newspapers run editorials mocking ghost hunters, while simultaneously printing serialized ghost stories to sat their readers' appetite. Pamphlets are published on how to investigate a haunting properly. Amateur societies form, armed with notebooks and thermometers, determined to prove what science hesitates to name. And through it all, the ghosts keep appearing. They do not seem to care whether anyone believes in them. 8th, why London is haunted. It would be easy to dismiss all this as superstition, the desperate fancies of a city addicted to death, but to do so is to miss the deeper truth. London is haunted because London remembers. Every street, every building, every brick has absorbed centuries of human joy and suffering. Fires have gutted it, plagues have hollowed it, wars have scarred it, revolutions have rattled its bones. And yet it endures, scarred but unbroken, a living palimpsest of memory. Ghosts are not just the dead refusing to rest. They are the city itself, dreaming of its past. The Victorians, for all their railways and empire, understand this instinctively. They live surrounded by the relics of those who came before, and they know that the past is never truly gone. It seeps into the present like damp through brickwork. It echoes in footsteps on empty staircases. It lingers in the chill that creeps over a room at midnight. And perhaps, just perhaps, that is why they cherish their ghosts. Because in a world changing faster than any generation has ever known, ghosts are proof that some things endure, that love and grief and guilt are stronger than time, that the city remembers you, even when everyone else has forgotten. X, a city that never walks alone. If you walk through London late on an autumn night, truly walk it. With your heart open and your breath slow, you will feel them. The pressmen of Fleet Street still sitting tight in the dark. The condemned rattling toward Tyburn in a coach that never arrives. The women of Whitechapel drifting through the fog, still waiting for justice. The princes playing hide and seek in the Tower. The monk praying in Westminster. The actor pacing backstage, still waiting for his cue. they are not gone. They are stitched into the fabric of the city, woven through its stones and sewers and smoke. London is not merely haunted. London is a haunting, a vast living ghost story built of centuries stacked atop one another. And on certain nights, especially the ones when the fog is thick and the wind carries the scent of coal and rain, the distance between you and them feels no wider than a pane of glass. A knock on a wall, a breath on your neck, a figure glimpsed in the corner of your eye, the old city remembering itself. So tread softly when the bells toll midnight and the gas lamps burn low and the streets grow still. You are not walking alone. You never have been. Chapter V, Grave Robbers and Resurrection. Men London loves the dead, but it doesn't always respect them. The Victorians talk a fine game about mourning and memorials, about eternal rest and sacred ground, yet beneath the hymns and headstones lurks a hunger that has nothing to do with sentiment. It is the hunger of science, of commerce, of curiosity, and it is never sated. By the early 19th century, that hunger has become ravenous. Medicine is advancing faster than at any point in history, and the teaching hospitals of London need corpses, hundreds of them, to dissect, to study, to peel open and chart like maps of a newly discovered continent. A surgeon without a cadaver is like a carpenter without wood, one Edinburgh physician famously declared. And so the pressure builds. The living are desperate to understand the dead, but the dead are in short supply. The problem is not a lack of death. London has that in abundance. Cholera, typhus, childbirth, hunger, the city coughs up bodies daily. But most of those bodies are off limits. The law, ever anxious about the dignity of Christian burial, decrees that only the corpses of executed criminals may be given over for dissection. And in an age when executions are becoming rarer, that means there are far too few cadavers to go around. Into this grim gap steps a new profession, one that thrives in darkness, digs by moonlight, and laughs at the notion of sacred ground. The newspapers will call them resurrection men. The public prefers a more honest name, body snatchers. The resurrection trade, they work in pairs or small crews, moving like shadows between the rows of headstones. Their tools are simple, a spade, a sack, and a bottle of gin to keep the night chill from their bones. They do not dig deep, just enough to reach the head and shoulders. A rope around the corpse's neck, a hard yank, and the body slips free like a turnip from soft soil. In less than 15 minutes, the dead is up and out of its resting place. The freshly interred are worth the most green goods, as the resurrection men call them. A body less than 3 days in the ground is supple, ideal for the surgeon's table. Too long buried, and it stiffens into a useless specimen. The resurrectionists learn to read the obituaries as carefully as the surgeons read their anatomy text. A funeral notice is not an invitation to mourn, but a business opportunity. The bodies are bundled into sacks, loaded onto carts, and whisked through the sleeping city to the hospitals that pay handsomely for them. The surgeons ask no questions. A cadaver is a cadaver, and the men who procure them are simply agents. In polite society, the fiction is maintained that these bodies come from the gallows. In reality, they come from the soil of ordinary graves, mothers, children, tradesmen, hauled from the earth before the mourner's tears have dried. For the resurrection men, the risks are real. If caught in the act, they face heavy fines, public beatings, or worse. They are hated by the public with a ferocity usually reserved for murderers. Families stand vigil over fresh graves, armed with clubs and lanterns, ready to defend their dead from thieves. Cemeteries hire night watchmen. Gravestones are rigged with tripwires and bells. Ingenious contraptions called mort safes, heavy iron cages bolted over graves, become a booming business. Wealthier families invest in iron coffins or bricking their loved ones in entirely. Even the poor, who can afford none of this, will sometimes plant thorn bushes or scatter broken glass over a grave to make digging harder, but the resurrectionists are resourceful. They dig from the head end to avoid disturbing the coffin plate, so the grave appears undisturbed from above. They pose as grieving relatives visiting the cemetery after dark. Some bribe sextons for fresh burial schedules. Others hire boys to linger near funerals, noting the size of the coffin and the location of the grave. The trade becomes so organized that rival gangs fight over territory. In London, the most notorious are the London Burkers, led by John Bishop and Thomas Williams, men whose greed will eventually turn from theft to something far worse. 2. The Burkers' trade. The story of Bishop and Williams reads like a penny dreadful, but it is all too real. By the late 1820s, Bishop is a veteran body snatcher, supplying London's medical schools with hundreds of corpses. But competition is fierce, and the risks are rising. Guarded graveyards, vigilant families, and increasing police patrols make the old ways harder. So Bishop and Williams hatch a new plan. If fresh corpses are worth the most, why wait for people to die? They lure vulnerable souls, street children, drunks, the destitute, to their lodgings with promises of food and shelter. Once inside, they drug them with laudanum, drown them in a well, and sell their bodies as if they were freshly dead from natural causes. They are careful not to leave marks, knowing that surgeons reject bodies with obvious wounds. Their victims vanish into the anatomy theaters, dissected and discarded, their murders unrecorded. Their downfall comes in November 1831, when they attempt to sell the body of a young boy to King's College. The surgeons grow suspicious, the corpse is too fresh, the cause of death too unclear, and the police are summoned. Bishop and Williams are arrested. A search of their property reveals the evidence: shallow graves, traces of laudanum, bloodstains where victims were dispatched. The trial is swift. They are hanged before a jeering crowd at Newgate, their bodies ironically destined for dissection. Their crimes shock London. The resurrection trade is suddenly more than grave robbing, it is murder. And though Bishop and Williams go to the gallows, their deeds cast a long shadow over the city as anatomy schools and the men who teach there. 3. Burke and Hare. The echo from Edinburgh Londoners might have been horrified Bishop and Williams, but the idea was not theirs. A decade earlier, William Burke and William Hare had plied the same grisly trade in Edinburgh. Their spree in 1828 left at least 16 people dead, suffocated and sold to the eminent anatomist Dr. Robert Knox. Burke and Hare became folk devils, their names synonymous with murder for profit. To Burke entered the English language as a verb, to smother or suppress. Their story electrified Britain and set the tone for every resurrectionist panic that followed. If such things could happen in respectable Edinburgh, surely London was no safer. The fear was not just of grave robbers now, but of murderers, killers who might strike not for hate or passion, but for anatomy. The specter of Burke and Hare haunted every dissection room. Students joked nervously about their cadavers' causes of death. Families peered anxiously at anatomy theaters, wondering if someone they loved lay on the slab. The line between grave robbing and murder had blurred, and the public began to demand action for the Anatomy Act of 1832 Parliament, as ever acted not out of compassion, but out of fear. Fear of riot, fear of scandal, fear of bodies swinging from gallows for crimes born of medical necessity. And so, in 1832, it passed the Anatomy Act. The act changed everything. It allowed surgeons and medical schools to claim the unclaimed bodies of the poor, those who died in workhouses, hospitals, or asylums without family or funds for burial. No longer limited to executed criminals, anatomists now had a steady supply of cadavers. The resurrectionist trade withered. Grave robbing dwindled. Cemeteries grew quieter, but if the law solved one problem, it created another. The poor, already treated as disposable in life, now faced the prospect of being dissected in death. Many begged to be buried by any means necessary, fearing that dying in poverty meant not just indignity, but violation. The workhouse dead became fodder for science, and the resentment this bred would simmer for generations. The act also did little to erase the memory of the resurrectionists. Their stories lingered in popular imagination, feeding penny dreadfuls and ghost tales. Children were warned to behave lest the body snatchers carry them off. Graveyards remained places of unease, haunted not by spirits, but by the fear of intrusion. Tools of the trade. To understand the resurrection men is to understand their craft, for theirs was a grim and meticulous art. They learned to read soil as well as any farmer, watching for the telltale settling that marked a recent burial. They could tell the weight of a coffin by the feel of the earth above it. A skilled resurrectionist could strip a body from the ground in under 20 minutes, leaving the grave so neat it might fool the grieving family when they returned the next day. Some worked with surgeons directly, delivering bodies to side doors under the cover of night. Others used middlemen, receivers, who laundered the corpses, presenting them as legitimate sources. A few even transported bodies across the Thames on barges, disguising them as freight or fish. And then there were the snatchers who specialized in specific bodies. A wealthy family might pay them to recover a relative stolen from a grave. A medical school might request a particular age or sex for a lecture. Resurrectionists obliged. For the right price, the dead could be delivered to Ardor. The trade was not without its own code. Most refused to rob church vaults, fearing both divine wrath and social outrage. Some avoided children's graves, considering them unlucky. But desperation erodes morality, and not all were so scrupulous. There are accounts of entire family vaults emptied in a single night, of infants' bodies taken from paupers' fields, of mourners arriving at funerals only to find the coffin empty. The graveyard wars. The resurrection men's reign transformed burial into an arms race. Cemeteries became fortresses. Stone slabs were set deep over coffins. Iron cages locked the dead in place. Some families hired armed guards to patrol the grounds for weeks after a burial. Others built small stone watchhouses beside the graves, from which relatives could keep vigil. Inventors rushed to profit from the fear. Patents were filed for spring-loaded coffins designed to fire pistols if tampered with. Others proposed coffins with hidden alarms or compartments filled with gunpowder. One enterprising blacksmith in Glasgow marketed a mort safe, so heavy it required 6 men to lift, and promised that even the most determined resurrectionists could not pry it loose. Not all solutions were so mechanical. Some families buried loved ones under piles of rubble or beneath slabs of concrete. Others dug graves deeper than regulation, filling the lower half with stone before laying the coffin on top. A few even buried decoy coffins above the real one, a grim nesting doll designed to frustrate would-be thieves. The battle was fiercest in the new cemeteries that sprang up on London's outskirts, Kensal Green, Highgate, West Norwood, built to relieve the overflowing churchyards. These garden cemeteries promised peace and permanence, but even their elaborate gates and watchmen could not always keep the resurrectionists at bay. And yet, for all their precautions, the fear persisted. Mourners sometimes opened coffins years later to find nothing but stones. Sextons confessed to selling bodies on the side. Rumors spread of undertakers who colluded with surgeons, delivering empty coffins to grieving families. Every grave was suspect. Every burial a gamble. 7. The macabre public. It would be comforting to think that ordinary Londoners despised the resurrectionists. And many did. They cursed them, beat them when caught, and marched in protest against the indignities inflicted on the dead. But fascination lurked beneath the outrage. Crowds gathered to watch dissection demonstrations, jostling for a glimpse of the open body. Pamphlets about body snatching sold briskly on street corners. Children played games called Burke and Hare. When Bishop and Williams were executed, more than 30,000 people crowded Newgate to see them die. Vendors hawked snacks and broadsides detailing their crimes. Artists sketched their faces for souvenir engravings. In death, the resurrectionists became entertainment. The Victorians were nothing if not contradictory, terrified of the desecration of their dead, yet drawn to it with morbid curiosity. They wanted science to advance, but not at the expense of sanctity. They wanted their bodies to rest untouched, yet they peered eagerly into the opened corpses of others. London is a city of hypocrisies, and none are starker than those that swirl around its dead. 8. The legacy of the resurrectionists by mid-century. The resurrection trade has mostly faded, strangled by the Anatomy Act and the vigilance of the public. But its legacy lingers in the city's bones. The very layout of London's cemeteries, their walls, their ironwork, their guarded gates, is shaped by the fear of body snatching. The mortsafe and the iron coffin, once common sights, become relics of a darker time. And the ghosts they left behind, metaphorical and literal, never quite leave. The image of the resurrectionist, lantern in hand, spade slung over his shoulder, slipping between tombstones like a carrion bird, haunts Victorian imagination. He appears in penny dreadfuls, on stage, and political cartoons. He is the specter of science unmoored from morality, of poverty weaponized against dignity, of a city willing to betray its dead for the promise of progress. Even now, beneath the manicured lawns of Highgate and Kensal Green, lie graves once violated, coffins once emptied. And perhaps, if one believes in such things, the dead remember. Some visitors claim to feel watched as they walk the rows. Some swear they hear faint scratching beneath the soil. And in the hush before dawn, when the fog curls low and the city is utterly still, it is said that you can sometimes hear the distant thud of spades and the creak of a coffin lid, echoes of a trade that will not stay buried. Ix. The price of knowledge. In the end, the resurrection men were symptoms, not disease. They were born of a contradiction that Victorian London could never quite resolve: the desire to conquer death without confronting what conquest required. They were the shadow cast by progress, ugly, necessary, and disavowed. Science marched forward. Anatomy blossomed. Surgeons learned to repair hearts, set bones, and save lives. But the knowledge was written, quite literally, on the bodies of the unwilling. Every dissection was an act of theft, sanctioned or not. Every breakthrough was paid for in the currency of human flesh. The Victorians preferred not to dwell on this. They spoke instead of enlightenment and advancement, of the triumph of reason over superstition. But in their quieter moments, in the pews of mourning churches, in the stillness of midnight graveyards, they could not entirely forget the price they had paid. And perhaps that is why the resurrection men never vanished from their nightmares. Because deep down, they knew the truth. The line between grave and table, between rest and violation, is thinner than anyone cares to admit. The city, as always, adapts. It folds the memory of the resurrectionists into its endless story and moves on, but it never forgets. London is built on bones, and bones do not easily forgive. The dead may rest, but they do not sleep. They keep watch beneath the soil, beneath the pavements, beneath the polished marble of new cemeteries. And on certain nights, when the wind moans through the trees and the shadows shift between the headstones, you might think you hear them stirring, not in anger, but in memory. They remember the spade, they remember the sack, they remember the hands that pulled them from the earth before they were ready, and they wait. Chapter by death becomes her. The fashion of mourning grief in Victorian London is not a feeling, it is a uniform. It is a language more codified than Latin, a performance more intricate than any opera. To mourn properly is not merely to weep, it is to dress your sorrow, to wear your loss upon your skin so that all who see you might know exactly how much of your heart has been torn away and how long ago it happened. In the city, mourning is as much a social duty as church attendance or marriage, and it is observed with the same fervent precision. Walk the streets of London in the 1860s, and you will see it everywhere. Rivers of black flowing down Bond Street, veils fluttering like ravens' wings in the wind, gloves and bonnets and parasols all dipped in shadow. The city dresses for the dead, and it does so according to rules as rigid as any law. The stages of sorrow. The Victorian mourner's journey is not a single act, but a carefully choreographed procession through stages of grief, each with its own palette, fabric, and symbolism. Etiquette manuals devote entire chapters to the subject. They tell you what to wear, how long to wear it, and how deeply your sorrow should be displayed for each relation. First mourning, or deep mourning, is the purest and strictest form. For a widow, it lasts a full year and a day. During this time, color is forbidden. Even a hint of shine is considered indecent. Dresses are made of dull, matte fabrics like bombazine or parramatta, designed to swallow the light. The silhouette is modest and severe. Veils of crepe, a stiff, crinkled silk, fall over the face like night itself. Jewelry is banned, save for pieces made from jet, onyx, or the hair of the deceased. Even gloves and handkerchiefs are trimmed in black. The widow in first mourning is not merely grieving. She is declaring herself a liminal being, poised between the world of the living and the dead. The heavy veil obscures her face not just from the public gaze, but symbolically from temptation. She is cloistered in fabric, a living shrine to the one she has lost. After 12 months and a day, she enters second mourning, a stage that allows a sliver of the world to seep back in. Fabrics may soften, adding silk or velvet to the wardrobe. Jet jewelry may be paired with pearls. The veil may be shortened or lifted entirely. It is a visual signal. The mourner is still sorrowful, but beginning to emerge from the shadow of death. Finally comes half mourning, a transitional phase lasting up to 6 months. Here, muted colors, gray, lilac, mauve, creep back into the wardrobe like dawn into a darkened room. Patterns reappear, jewelry brightens. The mourner is not expected to forget, but she is permitted to live again. Men's mourning is simpler and shorter. A black armband or cravat, perhaps a mourning band on a top hat. Widowers are expected to remarry. Widows are expected to remember. The double standard is not lost on Victorian women, but it is accepted, or at least endured. In a society where a woman's identity is bound to her husband, widowhood is not just a state of loss, but a kind of social exile. 2. The business of bereavement, where there are rules. There is money to be made enforcing them. Victorian London develops an entire industry around death, a vast and profitable economy that caters to every aspect of mourning. The most prestigious of these merchants is Jay's of Regent Street, known as the London General Mourning Warehouse. Founded in the 1840s, Jay's is a temple of grief, its shop windows draped in somber fabrics, and its display rooms filled with everything a bereaved family could desire. Dresses, cloaks, veils, bonnets, gloves, jewelry, stationery, all in regulation shades of black and gray. A widow with means can walk into Jay's and leave fully attired for every stage of mourning, her sorrow curated with exquisite taste. Mourning warehouses become status symbols in their own right. To shop at Jay's or Peter Robinson, this is to demonstrate not just grief, but refined grief, a sorrow conducted with dignity and decorum. Middle-class families stretch their budgets to outfit themselves properly, fearful of the social consequences of appearing insufficiently bereaved. Poorer families rent mourning clothes from secondhand shops or dye their existing garments black, a practice so common that entire streets reek of dye vats in the weeks after a funeral. Even correspondence bows to convention. Black-bordered stationery, with widths proportional to the mourner's relationship to the deceased, becomes a staple of Victorian life. A thick border signals profound loss, a narrow one, more distant grief. The practice extends to calling cards, invitations, and newspaper notices. Death permeates every level of communication, a constant visual reminder that life is fragile and fleeting. 3. Mourning jewelry. The dead adorning the living. Of all the industries spawned by Victorian mourning, none is more intimate or more macabre than the trade in mourning jewelry. These are not mere accessories. They are reliquaries, fragments of the dead transformed into wearable memory. Jet, a fossilized form of lignite coal, becomes the material of choice. Deep black and capable of a somber polish, it is mined in abundance from the cliffs of Whitby, a seaside town that thrives on death as much as on fishing. Brooch, lockets, earrings, and necklaces are carved from it, often etched with motifs of weeping willows, urns, and clasped hands. But jet is only the beginning. Hair, the most enduring part of the human body, is woven into intricate patterns and set into brooches and rings. Lockets contain miniature portraits framed by a loved one's hair, or even tiny glass vials holding a pinch of ashes. Some pieces are inscribed with names and dates. Others bear cryptic mottos like Resurgam, I shall rise again, or not lost. But gone before, these objects are not hidden away. They are worn openly, proudly, as declarations of love and loss. To wear a husband's hair at one's throat is to keep him near the pulse. To fasten a child's portrait at one's breast is to cradle them once more. Even men commission mourning rings and fobs, though theirs tend toward the austere. It is an intimacy that borders on the unsettling. The Victorians are not squeamish about death. They photograph their dead children, display them in parlors, and carry fragments of them on their bodies. It is a culture that refuses to let the grave have the final word. 4. The erotics of grief. There's a strange alchemy at work in all this, a transformation of grief into beauty, of sorrow into seduction. The Victorians would never admit it openly, but mourning, especially for women, carries a charge that is more than spiritual. The widow in deep mourning, veiled and untouchable, is an object of fascination. Her sorrow makes her sacred, her inaccessibility makes her desirable. Men speak of widows in hushed tones, of the mystery behind the veil, of the allure of a woman marked by tragedy. Some fall in love not despite the mourning dress, but because of it. Writers of the time note the phenomenon with a mix of amusement and alarm. A widow in her weeds, one columnist observes, has a power over men which the most dazzling debutante might envy. The very symbols meant to signal withdrawal from the world, the veil, the jet, the austere silhouette, become tools of power. This is not purely a male fantasy. For many women, mourning offers a rare kind of freedom. In a society that demands they be wives and mothers above all else, widowhood grants them autonomy. A widow controls her own household. She may manage her own money. She is exempt from the exhausting rituals of courtship. For some, the mourning veil is not just a shroud, it is armor. It is little wonder that some women choose never to leave mourning. Queen Victoria herself remains in black for the rest of her life after Prince Albert's death, turning widowhood into an identity rather than a phase. Her example filters downward. Elderly widows who refuse to rejoin society are praised for their fidelity. Younger ones who remarry too quickly are condemned for their frivolity. The mourning dress, once a temporary costume, becomes a lifelong habit for many, mourning as social theater. The Victorians are acutely aware that mourning is not just personal, it is public. One's handling of grief is a reflection of one's character, class, and respectability. To mourn too little is to invite scandal. To mourn too much is to court ridicule. Etiquette manuals scold those who fail to observe proper mourning periods. It is an insult to the memory of the dead, declares one 1861 guide. to appear in society before the prescribed time has elapsed. Newspapers gossip about widows who reappear at balls too soon, or who dare to wear colors before the half-mourning period. The scrutiny is relentless, and few dare defy it. Even funerals become arenas for social performance. The wealthy compete to outdo one another in displays of grief. Funerals grow lavish: plumed horses, long processions of carriages, elaborate floral arrangements. The coffin itself becomes a statement piece, lined with velvet and polished to a high sheen. Mourning coaches parade through the streets like royal carriages, turning private sorrow into public spectacle. For the poor, the pressure is crushing. They cannot afford carriages or bombazine or jet, but they are judged by the same standards. Many go into debt to pay for funerals and mourning clothes, fearing the shame of appearing indifferent. Undertakers exploit this anxiety, offering installment plans for burials. Pawnbrokers do brisk business in the weeks after a death. Even charity has a role. Philanthropic societies provide mourning outfits for destitute widows, ensuring that poverty does not prevent them from displaying appropriate sorrow. It is a peculiar cruelty. A society that allows its poor to starve will still insist that they dress properly to mourn. Vi, the children of sorrow mourning, spares no one, not even the smallest. Children, too, are dressed for grief, their bright clothes replaced by somber black. Boys wear miniature suits with crepe armbands, girls don black frocks and ribbons. Even infants are swaddled in dark fabrics, their cribs draped with mourning veils. Some parents photograph their dead children, arranging them to appear as if asleep, and display the portraits prominently. It is not morbid to them, it is memory. Death is so common in childhood that to refuse to look upon it would be an act of denial. The dead child becomes part of the family's visual history, as present as the living siblings in the next frame. The presence of death in childhood shapes the Victorian psyche. Children grow up attending funerals, wearing mourning, and hearing the bells toll for neighbors and siblings. They learn early that love and loss are inseparable, and they absorb the lesson that mourning is not shameful but expected, a duty owed to the dead. 7. The sacred and the profane. There is, of course, criticism. Some writers sneer at what they call the grief industry, accusing it of turning sorrow into fashion. Satirical cartoons depict widows flirting behind their veils or flaunting their jet jewelry like trophies. Preachers warn against the sin of pride disguised as mourning. Do not clothe your hearts in vanity, one sermon admonishes. Clothe them in humility, yet even the critics cannot escape the culture they mock. The rituals are too deeply woven into Victorian life. To reject them outright is to risk social exile. And so even those who grumble about mourning as excesses still don their black gloves and order their jet brooches. Beneath the satire, however, lies an uncomfortable truth. The Victorians need these rituals. In a world where death is everywhere, in the workhouse, in the factory, in the cradle, mourning provides structure. It offers a way to navigate the chaos of loss, to give shape to the unshapeable. It transforms grief from a raw wound into something bearable, something beautiful, even something powerful. 8. Death as identity. By the late Victorian era, mourning has seeped into the very fabric of identity. It is not just a response to death, it is a way of life. For some women, widowhood becomes their defining feature. They build their lives around the memory of the departed, hosting memorial dinners, funding charities in their husbands' names, and wearing mourning clothes for decades. Some never remarry, finding in their widowhood a dignity and autonomy they lacked as wives. For others, mourning becomes a kind of armor against a world that expects too much. A woman in deep mourning is excused from social obligations, from unwanted proposals, from the scrutiny that weighs on the unmarried. The veil protects her not just from the public gaze, but from public demand. Even the monarchy embodies this transformation. Queen Victoria, draped in black for 40 years, turns widowhood into a symbol of national identity. Her grief becomes the empire's grief. Her mourning attire sets the standard for all classes. The empire itself seems perpetually in half-light, dressed for a funeral that never ends. Shadows that linger. By the dawn of the 20th century, mourning's iron grip begins to loosen. The First World War will shatter the old order, overwhelming society with death on a scale too vast for etiquette to contain. The elaborate rituals of Victorian mourning will fade, replaced by simpler, more private expressions of grief. But their echoes remain. Black is still the color of funerals. Veils still fall over tear-streaked faces. We still wear jewelry inscribed with the names of the dead. We still light candles in windows and speak to empty rooms. The Victorians did not invent grief, but they gave it form, and in doing so, they left a legacy that endures. In the end, mourning is not just about the dead. It is about the living, about how we bear the unbearable, how we make meaning of absence, how we weave memory into the fabric of daily life. The Victorians understood this better than most. They knew that death does not end love. It merely changes its shape. And so they wrapped themselves in black, adorned themselves with the relics of the departed, and stepped back into the world with sorrow made visible. They did not hide from death. They were it. And in the faint rustle of crepe, in the glint of jet against pale skin, in the whisper of a veil drawn low over a widow's face, they found something that transcended grief, a beauty born of loss, a power born of remembrance. Death in their hands became not just an end, but an art. Chapter 7. The Theatre of Death. If the Victorian era was a cathedral to death, then London's stages were its most blasphemous chapels, part spectacle, part séance, part slaughterhouse. The same society that demanded solemn veils and whispered prayers at funerals also lined up, night after night, to watch murder reenacted beneath gaslight and ghosts conjured from smoke. In a world obsessed with death, the theater did not shy away from it. It sold tickets to it. Step through the doors of a London playhouse in the 1870s, and you enter a world that smells of sweat, grease paint, and something faintly metallic beneath. The ghost of blood, perhaps, or the anticipation of it. The velvet seats are filled with clerks and prostitutes, barristers and chimney sweeps, duchesses in pearls and navvies in boots caked with mud. They are here for one thing, to watch someone die. Melodrama and murder. The Victorians crave melodrama the way a drowning man craves air, and the genre obliges them with murder by the gallon. These are not polite tragedies or restrained drawing room dramas. They are blood-soaked morality plays that revel in betrayal, insanity, and the inexorable pull of the grave. At the Surrey Theatre, a popular 1860 production of Maria Martin, or The Murder in the Red Barn, retells the true story of a young woman lured to her death by her lover and buried beneath a barn floor. The play spares no detail. The audience watches Maria's slow realization of her fate, hears her screams as she is bludgeoned, and sees her corpse dragged across the stage. When the villain is finally hanged, the crowd roars its approval. The story becomes a national obsession, staged in every corner of Britain for decades. Children chant rhymes about Maria Martin in the streets. Souvenir prints of the real murderer, William Corder, are sold outside the theater doors, prints made on paper recycled from the very rope that hanged him. Audiences cannot get enough of this marriage of the real and the theatrical. Melodramas draw directly from newspaper headlines, wife poisonings, baby farm murders, railway suicides, infanticides in dark alleys. If a crime captures the public imagination, it will be on stage within weeks, embellished with monologues and blood-curdling screams. The Road Murder, the Whitechapel Tragedy, the Bermondsey Horror, the titles read like police blotters. Even Jack the Ripper, while still stalking the streets, inspires hastily written plays that trade facts for thrills. One notorious production features a cloaked figure stalking actresses across the stage, while the audience howls with a mix of terror and delight. Critics call it indecent. Playgoers call it unforgettable. 2. The penny gaff and the pleasure of horror. Not all theater wears velvet and lace. In the working-class neighborhoods of East London, the penny gaffs, rough and ready theaters charging a single penny for admission, stage entertainments far cruder and far bloodier. These are rowdy, chaotic spaces where audiences smoke, jeer, and throw orange peels at the actors. The performances are often cobbled together overnight and delivered with gusto, if not grace. What they lack in polish, they make up for in audacity. Penny gaff productions frequently depict real murders while the bodies are still warm in the ground. Some feature resurrections of executed criminals, dragged to hell by devils in papier-mâché masks. Others present mock autopsies, with actors dressed as surgeons carving up rubber corpses and pulling out pigs' entrails to delighted screams. These shows do not merely entertain, they purge. They allow audiences steeped in poverty, violence, and death to confront those realities on their own terms. A child who might find her brother, S-body in a workhouse dormitory tomorrow night, can laugh as the devil drags a murderer off stage tonight. A woman who scrubs blood from the floor after a drunken stabbing can shout herself hoarse, cheering as the villain on stage meets the gallows. Critics call the penny gaffs vulgar, obscene, even dangerous. The police attempt to shut them down, but they multiply like rats in the alleys, their stages painted red, their boards slick with stage blood, their audiences howling for more. 3. Phantasmagoria. Ghosts by gaslight. If melodrama offers blood, phantasmagoria offers ghosts, and Londoners devour both with equal appetite. Born in France in the late 18th century and imported to Britain soon after, phantasmagoria is an eerie fusion of theater and magic lantern show. Audiences sit in pitch darkness while images of skeletons, demons, and departed loved ones are projected onto screens or drift in clouds of smoke. The illusionists who stage these shows, men like Eddie and Gaspard Robertson and later, British imitators, use movable projectors on tracks to make the apparitions loom and shrink, approach and retreat. Hidden speakers pipe in ghostly moans. Sulfur and incense fill the air. For Victorians steeped in spiritualism, these shows blur the line between entertainment and invocation. Many believe they are witnessing real spirits. Others, even knowing the trickery involved, find themselves trembling when a ghostly skull rushes toward them from the dark. Phantasmagoria evolves into elaborate stage spectacles. At the Royal Polytechnic Institution, the Pepper's Ghost illusion debuts in 1862, a trick involving angled glass and hidden chambers that allows ghostly figures to materialize on stage alongside living actors. The effect is so convincing that one woman reportedly faints during a production of Charles Dickens' The Haunted Man. Soon, every self-respecting theater has its own ghost show. Specters glide across drawing rooms. Murdered lovers rise from their graves to curse their killers. Children cry out to dead mothers who reach for them with transparent hands. No séance could compete with the spectacle or the ticket sales. 4. Blood on the boards. The Victorians do not merely want to see death suggested, they want it shown. Stage combat grows ever more realistic. Pig's blood is splashed across costumes. Bladders filled with red dye burst when daggers strike. One notorious production of Macbeth at the Sadler's Wells. Theater in the 1850s drenches the stage in so much blood that the actors wade ankle-deep through it by the final act. Audiences scream and faint and come back for more. The more sensational the show, the larger the crowds. Playwrights compete to outdo one another in brutality. In one production of Sweeney Todd, a character who began as a serialized villain and grew into a stage sensation, The barber slits throats in graphic detail, blood spraying across his apron as the bodies tumble down a trapdoor. The crowd roars approval when Mrs. Levitt's meat pies are revealed to be stuffed with human flesh. Not all the blood is fake. Stages are dangerous places. Ropes snap, sets collapse, and actors fall from heights. In 1849, a scene involving firearms at the Princess's Theater goes horribly wrong, killing a stagehand. In another case, an actor playing Hamlet accidentally stabs his Polonius with a real blade left among the props. The audience, thinking it part of the show, applauds as the man bleeds to death behind the curtain. Even death outside the script feeds the theater's appetite. When the actor Edmund Kean collapses mid-performance in 1833 and dies shortly thereafter, demand for tickets to his next scheduled show, now a memorial performance, triples overnight. Death sells on stage and off. V. The Grand Guignol before Grand Guignol. Long before the infamous Grand Guignol Theatre of Paris shocks audiences with staged mutilations and rape, London is already nurturing its own brand of theatrical horror. These productions revel in excess, pushing audiences beyond fear into physical reaction. At the Britannia Theatre in Hoxton, a notorious production of The Maniac's Revenge culminates in a decapitation staged so convincingly that audience members vomit. The trick involves a wax head, a hidden trough of pig's blood, and a guillotine blade that stops a hair's breadth from the actor's neck. The newspapers denounce the show as depraved. It sells out for 6 weeks. Some plays invite the audience to participate in the violence. In The Fiend's Bride, spectators are encouraged to hurl curses at the villain as he prepares to dismember his victim. Actors pause for the din, basking in the crowd's bloodlust before delivering the killing blow. A reviewer calls it barbaric. The public calls it thrilling. Not all horrors are fictional. One notorious show claims to display the mummified corpse of a murderer on stage as part of the set, though whether it is real or a morbid fabrication remains a matter of debate. Even if false, the rumor is enough to pack the house. Veg, women, death, and the stage. The theater's obsession with death is not confined to gore. It is also deeply entangled with Victorian ideas about gender, sexuality, and power. Nowhere is this clearer than in the treatment of women on stage. Female characters die constantly. They are strangled, stabbed, poisoned, drowned, and hurled from balconies. They waste away from heartbreak, madness, or disease. Audiences weep and cheer as innocent maidens meet ghastly ends and wicked women receive gruesome justice. The spectacle of a woman, as suffering, performed night after night by actresses who know the choreography of death better than any surgeon, becomes one of Victorian theater's defining images. Yet there is power here, too. Actresses like Adelaide Neilson, Ellen Terry, and Sarah Siddons wield their deaths as weapons, turning their final gasps into art. A well-timed collapse, a lingering shudder, a bloodied hand reaching toward the footlights. These are the moments audiences remember. Critics praise an actress not just for her beauty or voice, but for how beautifully she can die. Some actresses exploit the morbid fascination to their advantage. Sarah Bernhardt, the French tragedian adored by London audiences, famously sleeps in a coffin to better understand death. She poses for photographs reclining within it, pale and serene, a living corpse. The image is scandalous and sells out theaters wherever she performs. 7. Séance as spectacle. The Victorians' obsession with ghosts does not stop at the stage door. Séances themselves become theatrical events, complete with tickets, programs, and scheduled performances. Some are intimate affairs in drawing rooms. Others fill public halls. Mediums like Daniel Douglas Home and Florence Cook hold audiences rapt as tables levitate, disembodied voices speak, and ghostly forms materialize from cabinets. Even skeptics attend, eager to witness what might be real, or at least real enough to unsettle. The line between seance and theater blurs entirely. Some mediums collaborate with stage illusionists to refine their tricks. Some magicians, like John Neville Maskelyne, build careers on debunking fraudulent mediums, even as they use the same techniques to create ghost illusions on stage. The public does not care whether the spirits are real. They want the thrill of believing, if only for a moment, that the dead walk among them. And the theater, ever hungry for spectacle, is happy to oblige. 8. The business of the macabre. By the late 19th century, the business of death on stage is booming. Playbills splash blood-red ink across their covers. Posters promise murder most foul. And apparitions beyond the grave. Merchants sell souvenirs, lockets shaped like coffins, programs printed to resemble death certificates, portraits of actors posed as corpses. Critics fret that the public's appetite for horror is corrupting morals. Religious leaders thunder against the trivialization of death. "We are a nation drunk on blood," one preacher declares in 1874. "We turn our theaters into charnel houses and call it art." The public shrugs and buys more tickets. They know what the critics do not, that death is not trivialized by being shown. It is tamed. It is brought down from the pulpit and the graveyard and placed where it can be looked at, laughed at, screamed at, even applauded. The theater is not mocking death. It is wrestling with it. Ix, the psychology of the spectacle. Why did the Victorians crave this theater of death? The answer lies in the world they inhabited. Death was everywhere, in the streets, in the workhouses, in the nursery. Epidemics swept through neighborhoods without warning. Chimneys collapsed. Factory machines mangled limbs. Death was not a stranger. It was a daily visitor. The theater offered a way to control that terror. On stage, death obeyed cues. It struck when the script demanded and withdrew on schedule. It was not random or senseless. It was art. It also offered catharsis. Audiences could scream and sob and exult, and then step back into the night alive and unchanged. They could face their deepest fears, murder, madness, the ghost of a loved one, and survive them. And, of course, there was pleasure in it. The Victorians would deny it if asked, but their actions betray them. They loved the thrill of the macabre, the way their hearts hammered when a ghost loomed or a blade flashed. They loved the delicious safety of being terrified among hundreds of strangers, knowing it was all pretend, even as part of them wondered, just for a heartbeat, if it might not be X curtain call. When the gaslights dim and the curtain falls, the audience spills out into the fog-choked streets, buzzing with the afterglow of death. They talk of the villain's grimace as the noose tightened, the ghost's slow glide across the stage, the way the blood steamed in the footlights. They buy broadsides recounting the story they have just seen. They hum snatches of the funeral dirge that played as the heroine died. Some will dream of it that night, the phantom hand reaching out, the shriek as the blade descends. Some will wake gasping and vow never to return. Most will be back next week. For all their sermons and sorrow, the Victorians know that death is not just an end. It is entertainment. It is catharsis. It is art, and nowhere is that more vividly, grotesquely true than on the stages of London, where ghosts are conjured, blood is spilled, and the audience pays gladly for the privilege of watching death dance. In the theater, death loses its sting, but not its thrill. And perhaps that is the true genius of Victorian London. It does not hide from the darkness. It builds a stage for it, sells tickets to it, and applauds when the curtain falls on its bloody final bow. Chapter 8, City of the Dead. Cemeteries and necropolis railways, death, in Victorian London, is not content to stay buried. It seeps upward from the ground, through the cobblestones and cellar floors, until the entire city reeks faintly of it. The streets are lined with the dead, packed shoulder to shoulder beneath the flagstones, their bones crowding the earth like commuters on the morning train. Centuries of corpses lie jumbled together, plague victims and paupers, bishops and thieves, stacked in layers so dense that roots twist around skulls and coffins collapse into one another. By the 1830s, London's dead are literally rising. In the churchyards of St. Pancras and St. Olave's, bones push through the soil after heavy rains. In Whitechapel, a workman digging foundations finds his spade slicing through human remains. In Holborn, a woman tending her garden unearths a jawbone still grinning. The living are horrified, but the dead have no more room to lie still. The air smells wrong, a sweet, putrid heaviness that sticks in the throat. Doctors warn of miasmas, invisible vapors rising from decomposing flesh, poisoning the lungs and spreading disease. They are not entirely wrong. Overflowing graves leach into wells. Coffin water seeps into basements. In the summer heat, gases swell beneath churchyards and burst the soil open like a wound. And still, the dead keep coming. The great stink of death, London's population has exploded. In 1800, the city holds just under 1 million souls. By mid-century, it holds more than 2 million. They come seeking work, fortune, survival, and they die in droves. Cholera rips through the slums. Typhus festers in damp rooms. Childbirth takes mothers and babies alike. Death is as regular as the tides, and the city is drowning in its corpses. Old parish churchyards, never meant to hold more than a few hundred bodies, now contain tens of thousands. Coffins are stacked in layers 15 deep. Gravediggers hack through older burials to make room for new ones, tossing bones aside like rubbish. Burials take place at night to avoid alarming the neighbors. In some parishes, funerals overlap. One coffin lowered before the last mound of earth has been tamped flat over another. It is not merely indecent, it is dangerous. Outbreaks of cholera and diphtheria follow the lines of old burial grounds. Even the authorities cannot ignore the horror forever. Reports to Parliament describe putrid effluvia rising from graves and foul emanations sickening entire neighborhoods. One coroner, visiting a churchyard in Clerkenwell, faints from the stench. Something must change. And so, reluctantly, London looks beyond its walls for a solution to the Magnificent Seven. The answer arrives in the form of 7 great cemeteries, landscaped cathedrals of death, built beyond the reach of the city's rot. They will become known, romantically and collectively, as the Magnificent Seven: Kensal Green, 1832, West Norwood, 1837, Highgate, 1839, Abney Park, 1840, Nunhead, 1840, Brompton, 1840, and Tower Hamlets, 1841. These are not churchyards, they are cities of the dead. Each is designed like a park, with sweeping avenues and winding paths, grand entrance gates and ornate chapels. Trees are planted in careful rows. Lakes and ponds reflect the sky. Flowers bloom among the headstones. The dead here do not rot in overcrowded pits. They rest in landscaped eternity. At Kensal Green, the first and grandest, marble angels raise their wings above avenues lined with mausoleums. The wealthy build monuments so lavish they resemble small temples, carved with urns, torches, and hourglasses with wings, symbols of mortality and resurrection. In Highgate, Gothic catacombs burrow into the hillside like arteries into the heart of death. Egyptian columns flank the gates, and stone sphinx guard the tombs of bankers and poets. Abney Park, a non-denominational burial ground, plants its dead among 2,500 species of trees and shrubs, turning sorrow into arboretum. Here, even in death, class follows you. The rich rest beneath obelisks and domes, their names carved deep into stone. Their mausoleums are built to last forever, or at least as long as empire. The poor are consigned to common graves, unmarked and communal, stacked in rows beneath the ornamental trees. Eternity, like everything else in Victorian England, is tiered. Yet for all the inequality, these cemeteries offer something radical: dignity. Even a pauper's burial here spares a family the horror of a churchyard grave split open by the next rain. And for the living, they offer something more profound, a place to visit their dead. 6. Rituals among the graves. The cemeteries are not just places of burial, they are stages for ritual. Victorian mourners come often, not just on anniversaries, but weekly, even daily. They bring wreaths woven from immortelles, flowers preserved to never wilt, and lay them gently on graves. They clean headstones and speak aloud to the departed. Some bring picnics, believing the dead enjoy the company. Others leave food or letters tucked into cracks in the stone. At night, lovers meet among the tombs, their whispered vows mingling with the silence of the dead. Spiritualists hold séances beneath mausoleum arches, seeking messages from those who lie within. Grave robbers still come too, though more furtively now, searching for jewelry or relics to sell. Stories spread of strange happenings. A woman in white drifting along the paths of Kensal Green. A spectral dog howling at a child's grave in Nunhead. Lights flickering among the catacombs of Highgate long after the gates are locked. Whether ghost or gaslight, no one can say, but few dare linger after dark. 7. The architecture of eternity. If the theater is where Victorians stage death for entertainment, the cemetery is where they build it into stone. Every mausoleum is a sermon, every monument a manifesto. Obelisks reach skyward, borrowed from Egypt and meant to symbolize the soul's ascent. Classical columns evoke the temples of Greece and Rome, tying the dead to an unbroken lineage of civilization. Gothic spires stab the heavens, their pointed arches suggesting divine yearning. Angels crouch on pedestals, faces bowed in eternal grief. Stone urns draped in marble cloth hint at the body's departure from its earthly vessel. Even the language of the inscriptions follows a pattern. Asleep in Jesus, gone but not forgotten. Not lost, but gone before. The phrases repeat like prayers, soothing the living and reassuring them that the dead are not truly gone. For the wealthy, these monuments are acts of legacy, statements of power meant to outlast empires. For the poor, a simple stone with a name carved into it is a victory over anonymity. In both cases, the cemetery becomes a book of stories, each grave a page, each inscription a line in the city's ongoing conversation with death. 8. Cities of silence. The Magnificent Seven changed the way Londoners think about death. Churchyards were cramped and squalid, places to be avoided. The new cemeteries are spacious and beautiful, places to be visited. They are not reminders of decay, but affirmations of continuity. Here, the dead are not hidden. They are woven into the city's daily life. Children play under the yews. Lovers carve initials into headstones. Poets stroll the paths, seeking inspiration. The boundaries between living and dead blur, and London becomes a city with two populations, one above ground, one below, sharing the same space in uneasy harmony. The Victorians embraced this duality. They built elaborate tombs as if planning to entertain guests in the afterlife. They pose for photographs beside their loved ones' graves. They design burial plots as family gathering places where future generations will come not just to mourn but to remember. And as London grows, so do its cities of the dead. Kensal Green expands. Highgate adds new catacombs. Brookwood swells into the largest cemetery in the world. The dead outnumber the living, and the city accepts this as inevitable. After all, every Londoner will one day join them. It's the weight beneath our feet for all the beauty and order of the new cemeteries. London remains haunted by its old ones. Beneath parks and gardens, pubs and warehouses, the bones of centuries lie jumbled and forgotten. Construction workers still unearth coffins when digging new tunnels. Basements still open into forgotten crypts. The dead are everywhere, not just in the cemeteries, but beneath every step. This awareness seeps into the Victorian imagination. Ghost stories multiply, Gothic novels bloom. The dead are never truly gone, the city whispers. They are beneath your feet, behind your walls, inside the water that runs through your pipes. They are watching, and perhaps they are. Perhaps the dead resent their displacement, uprooted from churchyards and carted off on trains to distant fields. Perhaps they envy those whose names are carved in stone while they rot in forgotten pits. Or perhaps they're simply waiting, patient as stone, for the living to join them. X. The long sleep. By the end of the 19th century, London has remade its relationship with death. What was once chaotic and fetid is now ordered and ceremonial. The cemeteries stand as monuments not just to the dead, but to the living's determination to master mortality, to make even death obey the logic of empire and progress. Yet beneath the marble and the manicured lawns, death remains what it has always been, vast, indifferent, and inevitable. The dead do not care for iron fences or railway timetables. They do not care for hierarchies or hymns. They lie silent beneath the soil, dreaming their long dreams, while the city above them changes and forgets. Still, the Victorians try. They build gates and paths and railways. They carve their grief into stone and send their dead into the countryside on trains that mimic the journeys of the living. They plant trees over their graves and teach their children to walk among the tombs without fear. They try, in every way they know, to make peace with the one fact no empire can conquer. And in doing so, they leave behind a landscape unlike any other, a landscape where sorrow blooms into beauty, where stone tells stories, where trains carry coffins like carriages of kings. A landscape where the living walk hand in hand with the dead and call it Sunday. London is not one city but two. One rises from the river, loud and restless and always changing. The other lies beneath it, silent and patient and eternal. Together they form a single organism, a city that remembers, a city that endures, a city built as much on bones as on bricks. And as the last light fades over the yews and the gas lamps flicker to life, you might feel it, the slow, steady heartbeat beneath the ground. It is the sound of millions sleeping, the pulse of the city of the dead. And one day, whether you like it or not, it will be your heartbeat too. Chapter 9. The Devil's Work. Witchcraft, folklore, and the fear of the old ways, long before London wrapped itself in brick and soot, long before the first gas lamp flared to life, the land beneath it belonged to older gods. They were not written about in Bibles, nor carved into cathedrals. They lived in rivers and stones, in crossroads and oak groves, in the soil beneath bare feet. Their rites were whispered in kitchens and crossroads, their names carried on the breath of wind. And though the Victorians prided themselves on science and empire, those older forces never left. They merely changed their clothes. Beneath the clatter of horse hooves and the hum of telegraph wires, London still hears the heartbeat of an older England, one that believes in witches and charms, in curses and blessings and the devil's presence lurking just beyond the hedgerow. Aye, the ashes of the burning times. By the 19th century, the days of witch trials and bonfires are long gone, but not long enough to be forgotten. The memory still clings to the English countryside like wood smoke. Between the 1500s and late 1600s, more than 500 people, mostly women, were executed for witchcraft in England. Their ghosts walk through the Victorian imagination, barefoot and bound, whispering warnings from the stake. In Suffolk and Essex, old women still trace the shape of a cross on their doors each May Day to ward off witches. In Yorkshire, children are taught not to point at a hare, for it might be a witch in animal form. And in Devon, no one dares leave milk uncovered overnight, lest a witch spoil it with a curse. These are not empty superstitions. They are memories of terror passed down through generations, stories told in kitchens and churchyards of how the devil once walked among them. A crook neighbor, a midwife whose hands never failed, a widow who spoke to her cat as if it understood. All could be witches. All could be damned. The Victorians claim to have moved beyond such nonsense. But in the quiet corners of the countryside, where gaslight has yet to reach and the wind carries strange sounds through the hedgerows, the old fear still curls like smoke. 2. Cunning folk and the village witch. Not all witchcraft is feared, some of it is sought. Across Britain, well into the Victorian age, every village has its wise woman or cunning man, healers, herbalists, charmers who straddle the line between folk medicine and magic. These cunning folk are not witches in the legal sense. The Witchcraft Act of 1735 has redefined witchcraft as fraud rather than sorcery, but in the eyes of their neighbors, they wield powers beyond the ordinary. They cure sick livestock with whispered charms. They brew potions to mend broken hearts. They find stolen goods by scrying into bowls of water or polished glass. They offer blessings for weddings and curses for enemies, though they rarely admit the latter openly. One such cunning woman, Old Mother Redcap of Camden, is said to have been consulted by both washerwomen and members of Parliament. Another, James Morrill of Hadleigh, known as the Cunning Man of Essex, is reputed to have healed the dying and cursed the guilty well into the 1850s. Villagers speak his name with a mix of reverence and fear. The church denounces these practices as superstition. Magistrates occasionally arrest cunning folk under the Witchcraft Act, but the arrests rarely stick. The villagers defend their wise women and men fiercely. Better her herbs than the doctor's leeches, one farmer scoffs at a trial. And in truth, the cunning folks' remedies often work better than anything Victorian medicine can offer. Their tools are humble but powerful. Sprigs of rowan hung over doors to keep out evil. Iron nails driven into thresholds to ward off curses. Salt cast into hearth fires to drive away spirits. They mix prayers with spells, psalms with charms, Christianity and paganism entwined like ivy on a stone wall. 3. The hearthside devil for all the cunning folks' usefulness, there remains the darker side of witch belief, the lingering dread of the devil's servants. Every village has stories. In Norfolk, they whisper of a woman who could turn herself into a hare and steal milk from cows miles away. In Somerset, they speak of a witch-sways wind that blows only when a particular old man is angered. In Sussex, they fear the hag-ridden, sleepers who wake with scratches and bruises after the night visits of unseen witches. These tales are told beside hearth fires and in alehouses, always with a glance over the shoulder. Sometimes the witch is punished, trapped by a horseshoe nailed above the door, or forced to reveal herself when a cursed object is burned. Sometimes she simply vanishes, never seen again once her deeds are discovered. And sometimes she lingers, her presence felt in every dead lamb and souring churn of butter. Children are warned never to whistle after dark. A witch will hear it, they're told, and follow the sound home. A pot left boiling too long might invite a spirit into the house. A black cat crossing one's path is not bad luck, it is a witch watching. The devil himself lurks in these tales, though rarely by name. He is the dark man at the crossroads offering bargains. He is the rider who passes silently at midnight, his horse leaving no prints. He is the stranger who knocks and asks for milk, and woe to those who refuse. Victorian rationalists scoff, but in the countryside, people still nail witch bottles behind hearthstones, glass vessels filled with pins, hair and urine meant to trap a witch's malice. They still carve apotropaic marks, daisy wheels and burning symbols into door frames to keep evil out. They still bury dead cats in walls, believing they guard against sorcery. Science has its place, but so does salt on the windowsill. 4. Ghosts of the burning times, if witches are rare in Victorian England, witch stories are not. They bloom like hemlock in the popular press, feeding a public appetite for the uncanny. The Illustrated London News runs serialized accounts of witchcraft trials from centuries past, their details lovingly retold. Penny dreadfuls spin lurid tales of witches' sabbaths and remote glens and covens meeting under full moons. Even respectable journals publish essays pondering the psychology of belief and whether witchcraft might once have been a misunderstood science. The past is not dead. It is entertainment. And yet, woven through the sensationalism is a thread of unease. The Victorians are fascinated by witches because they reveal something unsettling about themselves. The same empire that believes it has tamed nature cannot quite banish the idea that nature has teeth. The Pendle witches of 1612, hanged for meeting the devil on a Lancashire hilltop, still stalk the Victorian imagination. So too do the Biddeford witches, executed in 1682, their deaths still remembered in Devon churchyards. Plays reenact their trials. Ballads sing of their curses. Their names are invoked when cows sicken or children vanish. The flames that consume them still cast a faint light on the Victorian night, v. the witches of London. Even in London, proud, industrial, modern London, whispers of witchcraft persist. In 1808, a woman named Ruth Osborne is accused by neighbors of bewitching a cow in St. Albans and is nearly lynched by a mob. In 1863, a farmer near Ipswich blames a local woman for his failing crops and attacks her with a pitchfork. As late as 1875, a suspected witch named Ann Turner is beaten and drowned in a village pond by neighbors, convinced she cursed a child. These are not relics of the Middle Ages. They happen beneath the gaslights, in the shadow of the railways. The Witchcraft Act may have declared witchcraft a fraud, but the belief refuses to die. In the city itself, the line between superstition and performance blurs. Witch doctors advertise in newspapers, offering to lift curses for a fee. Spiritualist mediums hint at darker powers. Occult booksellers in Holborn sell grimoires promising contact with elemental, spirits, and ancestral powers. Even Queen Victoria herself is rumored to have consulted astrologers. At the margins, older practices persist in secret. In East End alleyways, women burn herbs and mutter charms over sick children. In Southwark, dock workers hammer nails into oak beams to keep witch winds from capsizing ships. In Hampstead, children leave offerings of bread and milk for the little people in hollow trees. The city fancies itself enlightened, but beneath its cobbles, the old ways still coil like roots beneath paving stones. Vi, tales for the dark half of the year. If there is a season when witch stories grow strongest, it is autumn, the darkening half of the year, when the harvest is gathered and the nights lengthen. And none is more potent than the eve of All Hallows, when the veil thins and the world grows porous. In Sussex, they say, witches dance on Chanctonbury Ring on Halloween night, circling the ancient Hilfort until dawn. In Cornwall, people hang Rowan crosses above their doors and leave offerings of cream for the piskies to keep witches at bay. In Norfolk, families place iron knives under their pillows to ward off night hags. Old customs linger like embers. Young women still peel apples and toss the skins over their shoulders to divine the initials of their future husbands. Boys still leap over bonfires to prove their courage. Children still carve grotesque faces into turnips and carry them from door to door, a tradition older than Christianity. These rituals are fragments of something older, remnants of Samhain, the Celtic festival marking the year's end. Christianity absorbed and renamed it, but the bones of the old rite remain: fire and darkness, divination and remembrance, protection from spirits and invitation to them. The church bells toll, but the witches still dance. 7. The green and the black. Not all Victorian witches are figures of fear. Some are symbols of resistance, embodiments of the untamed, the feminine, the natural in a society obsessed with control. The Romantics, poets like Wordsworth, Coleridge, and Shelley, reclaim the witch as a figure of mystery and wildness. Painters depict witches not as hags, but as beautiful, dangerous women, draped in night and moonlight. Writers reimagine them as misunderstood healers, rebels against oppressive order. This sympathetic vision seeps into popular culture. Children's books feature kindly witches who brew healing potions and speak to animals. Folk songs celebrate the wise woman in the wood who helps lovers and blesses crops. Even in penny dreadfuls, witches are as often tragic figures as villains. The figure of the witch becomes a mirror for Victorian anxieties about gender, about science, about empire. She is what the age fears most, the untamed, the unknowable, the part of the world that refuses to be measured or controlled. Eighth, charms and curses, folk magic does not disappear in the Victorian era. It adapts. In cottages and kitchens across England, people still perform small acts of magic, blending Christian prayer with pagan practice. A horseshoe hung above the door keeps witches out. Bread baked on Good Friday, dried and powdered, cures stomach ailments. A lock of hair buried beneath the hearth binds a lover's heart. A dead man's hand, if one can be obtained, can be used to find buried treasure or to render oneself invisible. Some charms are darker. A poppet, a doll fashioned from cloth or wax, might be hidden in an enemy's chimney, pierced with pins to bring misfortune. A witch bottle, filled with nails and hair and buried beneath a doorstep, can reflect a curse back on its sender. Even well into the late 1800s, laborers renovating old houses in London occasionally unearthed these bottles, their contents as pungent as the fears that made them. These acts are rarely spoken of. They exist beneath the surface, woven into daily life like threads too fine to see. A whispered rhyme here, a sprig of rowan there, gestures half remembered, half believed, but performed all the same. Ix, the old faith's last breath, by the twilight of the Victorian era, witchcraft has transformed. The Witchcraft Act is repealed in 1951, but its death knell rings decades earlier as witch trials fade into distant memory, and the word witch softens into metaphor, yet the old ways do not vanish. They retreat into folklore, into ritual, into the quiet corners where belief lives on. They survive in the charms pinned above cradles, in the iron nailed into barn doors, and the stories told by firelight on storm-tossed nights. They survive, too, in the new spiritual movements that bloom in the late 19th century, the Theosophists and the Golden Dawn, who speak of ancient wisdom and elemental, forces who weave pagan threads into the tapestry of modern occultism. These societies cloak their rites in Latin alchemy, but beneath the trappings lies the same heartbeat that once pulsed through forest glades and standing stones. The witch endures because she is not a person but a principle, a symbol of nature's wildness, of the soul's hunger for mystery, of the parts of ourselves that refuse to be tamed. She is fear and freedom, danger and desire. She is the ember that refuses to die, glowing faintly even when the fire seems long gone. X, the devil's shadow in the end. Victorian England does not banish witchcraft. It domesticates it. It folds it into folklore, into literature, into the hidden rituals of daily life. It locks the devil out of the parish, but leaves him a seat by the hearth. It hangs crosses above doors, but still nails horseshoes beside them. And so the old ways linger, not in Sabbaths on hilltops, but in the small, stubborn gestures that slip through the cracks of empire and industry. A broom left bristles up behind the door. A circle of salt on the windowsill, a charm whispered over a sick child. A story told in the half-light of a dying fire, about a woman who walked with the devil and was never seen again. London may boast its railways and gaslights, its science and empire, but when the wind howls through the alleys and the moon hides behind a shroud of cloud, the city still remembers. The land still remembers, and deep beneath the cobblestones, older gods still stir, for the devil never truly left England. He simply learned to walk on quieter feet. Epilogue. When the veil falls, the clocks of London toll midnight and the city exhales. The gas lamps hiss. The Thames rolls dark and slow beneath the bridges. Somewhere, a hansom cab clatters past, its wheels echoing like the pulse of a sleeping giant. And beneath it all, beneath the stones, beneath the noise, beneath the centuries, the dead listen. They have been here all along. Beneath the cobbled lanes where lovers walk arm in arm. Beneath the rows of terraced houses and the yawning mouths of the underground. Beneath the clanging foundries and soot-stained steeples. They lie packed shoulder to shoulder, Londoners still, waiting for a city that never stops living to finally slow down. It never does. And that is why they wait. The Victorians, in their hunger to master death, built monuments and mausoleums, staged ghosts on the stage, summoned spirits to the drawing room, and sent the departed out of town on iron rails. They catalogued grief and measured it in weeks and veils. They lit candles for the dead and photographed them, as if refusing to believe they were gone. They pinned charms above their doors and whispered psalms against witches. They told themselves the past could be contained, a memory bound in stone, a superstition outgrown. But the past does not stay buried. It seeps upward like damp through a cellar wall. Walk the streets of Highgate at dusk and you might feel it, the faint shift of air as if someone has just passed you by. Sit in a pew at St. Pancras and listen carefully, and you might hear it, the low, rhythmic thrum that is not the organ but the steady heartbeat of the ground itself. Peer too long into the Thames on an autumn night, and you might glimpse faces that do not belong to the living. Because the truth is this, London is a palimpsest written in blood and bone, and the ink beneath the newest layer never fully fades. The breath between worlds, every autumn, as the year begins its long descent into darkness, the veil between worlds thins. The Victorians did not call it Halloween. That foreign word with its pagan roots was better left unsaid, but they felt it all the same. The air grew heavier, candles burned lower, shadows stretched longer across the cobblestones, and for a few nights the world seemed less certain, as if something vast and patient stirred just beyond the edge of sight. On such nights, mourners carried chrysanthemums to graves they had not visited in years. Children clutched turnip lanterns carved into grotesque faces. Cunning women tied charms of rowan and red thread to their doors. And in the parlors of Bloomsbury and Belgravia, respectable ladies placed their fingers on planchettes and waited for a knock from the other side. Some called it folly, others called it faith. Most simply did not speak of it at all, but they all felt it, that breath of something ancient brushing the nape of the neck, that subtle bending of the world's fabric, that unspoken knowing that the living were not alone. And they were right. The old ones still walk, long before the Victorians drew their neat lines between science and superstition. Britain belonged to older powers. They are still here if you know where to look, in the standing stones that dot the countryside, aligned with stars long fallen from favor, in the sacred wells where coins are tossed and wishes whispered, in the circles of mushrooms that appear overnight on Hampstead Heath. The church called them demons, the law called them nonsense, the Victorians called them old wives' tales, but none of the names mattered. A charm against the evil eye still hangs above a door in Whitechapel. A cat still sleeps atop a hearthstone to keep the witches at bay. And every so often someone disappears on a fog-shrouded lane, and no one speaks of it above a whisper. Even the witches, or what remains of them, have not vanished. They have merely gone to ground. They no longer dance on hilltops or summon storms from the sea. They light candles in quiet rooms and speak the names of herbs their grandmothers taught them. They press charms into the hands of the grieving and whisper blessings over sick children. They survive not in Sabbaths and sacrifices, but in small acts. And small acts are the ones that last. The devil, too, has learned subtlety. He no longer rides the night on cloven hooves. He walks the Strand in a black coat, his hat pulled low. He lingers in the whispers of men who sell their souls not for power but for profit. He smiles from behind a newspaper headline, from the gleam of a banker's watch, from the reflection in a mirror when no one else is in the room. The old powers are quieter now, but they are not gone. The city that never dies. If you listen to London at night, really listen, you will hear more than the rattle of carriages and the distant cry of a newsboy. You will hear the breath of the dead rising from beneath your feet. You will hear the rustle of yew branches over centuries-old graves. You will hear the soft scrape of something moving behind the bricked-up door of a forgotten crypt. You will hear the city remembering itself, because London is not merely a city of the living. It is a vast organism composed of the living and the dead, of the past and the present, of faith and fear. Its streets are arteries. Its buildings are bones. Its river is blood. And its heartbeat, that slow, relentless thrum beneath the noise, belongs to every soul that ever called it home. The Victorians knew this, even if they did not admit it. Why else build cemeteries as grand as cathedrals? Why else ride trains that carried the dead like passengers? Why else hold séances in parlors and photograph their dead as if they still breathed? They were not denying death. They were negotiating with it, trying to fold it into life, to domesticate it, to make it part of the city's rhythm. They did not succeed. Death does not bargain. But in trying, they created something stranger and more enduring. A city where the dead are never truly gone. A city that remembers. The weight of all who came before stand in Highgate at dusk, and you will feel it, the weight of countless eyes watching from beneath the soil. Walk the banks of the Thames where plague pits once yawned open, and you will feel it, the press of centuries beneath your solace. Pause beneath the gaslight on Fleet Street and look into the darkened windows of an old print shop, and you might feel it, that electric prickling on the back of your neck as if someone is standing just behind you. Perhaps they are, for the veil does not fall all at once. It frays, it thins, it lets things through in threads and whispers. A familiar scent where no one stands. A shadow that lingers half a heartbeat too long. A voice that calls your name from an empty room. The Victorians built walls against such things, laws, rituals, reason, but walls crack. And when they do, what waits on the other side does not rush in. It seeps, it slides. It settles in the corners and waits to be noticed. And once you notice it, you will never unsee it again. The final whisper London in the 19th century believed it was conquering death. It built vast cemeteries to contain it, railways to carry it, rituals to domesticate it, spectacles to laugh at it. It turned ghosts into entertainment, witches into curiosities, and sorrow into etiquette. But death is not a foe to be conquered. It is a tide that cannot be turned back. And London, for all its science and empire, for all its iron and steam, is still built upon that tide. Tonight, as the wind howls down Whitechapel Road, and the last light fades from St. Paul's Dome, the veil thins again. It always does. And as it does, the city remembers everything. The plague carts and the witch bottles. The séances and the Sabbaths, the mourners in black crape and the resurrection men with their shovels. It remembers the whispered charms and the unspoken fears. It remembers the names carved in stone and those lost to time. It remembers you too, because one day you will be part of it. One day, your heartbeat will join the slow, steady thrum beneath the cobblestones. One day, your story will be written in the city's soil. One day, someone will pause beneath a gas lamp and feel a prickling on the back of their neck, and they will not know that it is you watching. And the city will go on, as it always has, alive and dead all at once. The veil will thin and thicken forever. And somewhere in the dark between worlds, something ancient and patient will smile, because London does not end. It only changes shape, and so do we.